Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. As I was editing my previous video, I realized that I accidentally glossed over one of the most pivotal characters in the series, Mr. Plutarch Heavensbee. But no worries, because today we are fixing that mistake, and this video is dedicated solely to Plutarch. So let's talk about who he is, where he comes from, what he wants, what role he ultimately plays, and together decide whether Plutarch is a hero or a villain. If you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Now let's get cozy and let's dive into it. So, if we take the entire Hunger Games series in its totality, the prequels included, we first meet Plutarch Heavensbee in Sunrise on the Reaping. Plutarch is a capital citizen. He is related to Hilarious Heavensbee, who we meet in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Hilarious is actually Coriolanus Snow's classmate at the academy that they attend together, and he is also a fellow mentor for the 10th annual Hunger Games. We learn that Hilarious comes from an extremely wealthy family, and while he does want his tribute to do well in the games, he mostly wants her to do well, not just so that she would be safe and potentially even win. In his case, it's more so that he wants praise from his parents. In Sunrise on the Reaping, we learn that while the rest of the capital seemed to suffer during the dark times and the war, the Heavensbees have actually managed to hold on to their wealth. For example, in a scene where Haymitch goes to Plutarch's house, we learn that Plutarch has a huge library full of books. This is actually one of the things that triggers Snow when it comes to the Heavensbee family, mostly because in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, it is stated that when things got extremely tough, the families, wealthy ones, middle class ones, and very poor ones, had to burn their books in order to stay warm. And clearly, when it came to the Heavensbees, that was not the case. That's why it's so interesting, because Snow seems to have a distaste for the Heavensbee clan overall, and yet Plutarch has managed to become an essential part of Snow's regime and also a part of constructing the games. Personally, I think that it comes down to the fact that Snow likes to surround himself with wealthy people, and because Snow likes competent people, and Plutarch is exactly that. Well, actually, more so competent people who do exactly what Snow wants them to do. When we enter Haymitch's story in Sunrise on the Reaping, Plutarch is working as a cameraman for the 50th Hunger Games, aka the first Quarter Quell. He is directly responsible for covering all things District 12 and creating a very capital-friendly "the Hunger Games are needed in order to maintain peace" narrative. Once Seneca Crane is assassinated after Katniss's first Hunger Games, Plutarch replaces him as the Head Gamemaker, a position he holds for only a single Hunger Games, because then fire catches and literally all hell breaks loose. So now that we know who Plutarch is and how he fits into the Hunger Games universe, let's analyze what he does, what kind of choices he makes, and whether those choices land him in the hero category, the villain category, or perhaps somewhere in between. I think that Plutarch can be seen as a pretty controversial character, because even at his core, he swings between both extremes in very drastic ways. On the one hand, he is completely fearless, something that you have to be when you are planning a revolution right under the president's nose, while also seemingly being completely dedicated to his cause, which is the Hunger Games. He's also extremely intelligent and, like I mentioned, competent. He's able to come up with clever little ways of manipulating the games and making Snow believe that he's just so dedicated to keeping the games alive, helping to keep them going, and helping the capital to maintain its power. Like I said, competence is a trait that Snow seems to really admire, particularly after Seneca Crane completely drops the ball. Well, in his opinion, but it is also a trait that Plutarch eventually uses to destroy the regime and to take Snow down. So I guess at the end of the day, the joke is on Snow. Plutarch is definitely kind, and there are definitely a lot of examples of him exhibiting his kindness. To start, while some of the, or actually many of the people who work on the Hunger Games are essentially treating the tributes as animals and even beating them, Plutarch is shown to generally be very, very kind to them. When it comes to Haymitch, he makes it possible for Haymitch to say goodbye to his mom and to his brother, and then he also invites Haymitch to his house and allows him to call Lenore Dove. Another thing that really stuck out to me is that he seems to be genuinely disturbed when he learns that the capital replaced Luella, who died, with a District 11 girl and essentially created some sort of a hybrid between the two. When it comes to Katniss, he seems to be especially protective of her. For example, when Peeta is captured by the capital and his interview is being broadcast to the entire country, Plutarch goes to Katniss's room seemingly wanting to check on Katniss because he realizes that the interview must be extremely tough for Katniss to watch. Also in Mockingjay, Katniss is insisting that she wants to go to, I believe, District 8 and fight alongside the rebels, but Plutarch is not wanting to let Katniss go because I think he does not want her to perish in a battle. I think the most important positive trait that Plutarch has is simply the fact that he does not agree with the Hunger Games. I mean, he clearly doesn't, because if he did, he wouldn't have spent so many years working toward organizing a successful rebellion. He seems to be completely willing to sacrifice his life in order to break the system and build a better and a more fair one in its place. The risk is out of this world, because if Snow were ever to find out what Plutarch has been doing, he would have been as dead as all of the other tributes who died in the arenas. But there is also a flip side. What's complicated though is that you can flip any of the traits and the examples that I just mentioned and turn them into the traits of a villain. For example, his fearlessness and cleverness can be just as easily taken for him being cunning and calculated. After all, he appeared to be completely loyal to Snow while actually planning to overthrow him this entire time. He definitely seems to care about Katniss and Peeta, but to me, he doesn't come off as equally concerned about all of the other kids and older people who die in the arenas and all of the battles, because it is the greater good that effectively matters most. So when you look at it that way, what if Plutarch allowing Haymitch to call Lenore Dove is nothing but him trying to manipulate Haymitch and get Haymitch to trust Plutarch so that he would agree to play his part in blowing up the arena? What if he only cared about Katniss's physical and mental well-being because he needed her to be a very, very successful Mockingjay so that his second attempt at a revolution would, well, also be successful? Okay, let's talk about the propaganda, because this is actually an issue that I definitely had with Plutarch as I was reading, well, actually Catching Fire, Mockingjay, and Sunrise on the Reaping. To summarize, in Sunrise on the Reaping, Plutarch is a cameraman for District 12, one of the male tributes who gets reaped. Woodbine decides to make a run for it and he gets shot, and Haymitch becomes his replacement. Because the reaping is televised and Plutarch is responsible for shooting the footage that is going to help Snow maintain status quo and keep the capital and Snow looking strong, Plutarch needs to get creative. So he insists that Haymitch's mom and brother Sid, who are already traumatized, act for the cameras and basically act as if they are shocked and surprised to see Haymitch being reaped, because again, Haymitch was not technically reaped. Woodbine was. It is completely inhumane to take people who are already in a very, very tough mental space and treat them as props, but Plutarch seems to have a very nonchalant, casual, if it must be done, it must be done attitude about the entire thing. Plutarch probably also played a role in skewing the footage of the 50th Hunger Games, manipulating it and completely misrepresenting what actually happened in the arena and misrepresenting who Haymitch was and what he did. Plutarch continues to use people and the aftermaths of very tragic events for propaganda purposes once he is revealed to be part of the rebellion too. And honestly, reading those scenes in the books and watching them in the movies did make me feel kind of icky, to say the least. But just like with Plutarch's personality, there is a flip side here too. Let's start with the fact that Plutarch doesn't really have a choice. He has to contribute to and to create capital propaganda. After all, he's playing the long game, which involves making sure that Snow is happy for as long as needed, no matter what the cost. So like I said, Plutarch definitely disregards Haymitch's, mom's, and brother's mental state and uses them as props in his propaganda. But at the same time, when they comply, he's then able to give Haymitch and them a moment to say their goodbyes. When it comes to Katniss, she's definitely pretty difficult to coach at first, and there's definitely an element of smoke and mirrors when it comes to creating Katniss's propos. At the same time, when Katniss is able to express natural emotions like grief and anger, Plutarch's propaganda turns Katniss into a symbol that the people of the districts can identify with, believe in, and follow. That is why I'm so torn, because Plutarch is one of the people who create propaganda that keeps the capital people blissfully ignorant, the district people fearful and oppressed, and the games continuing. But it's that very same propaganda that he then uses to inspire the districts, make them feel empowered, and completely flip the narrative that he's been previously building for the enemy side. Alright, let's talk about the revolutions. So, in Sunrise on the Reaping, we get quite a few scenes between Plutarch and Haymitch. Eventually, it is revealed that Plutarch is actually a double agent. Yes, he does bend the knee and helps to spread the capital propaganda throughout Panem, but he also works with the rebellion to foil the games and to destroy Snow's regime. Even though the initial rebellion plan fails, he continues to participate in the rebellion activities on the down low, recruits District 13 that everybody thought got wiped out, and spearheads a second attempt at a revolution during the 75th Hunger Games, which features victors from the previous Hunger Games. Kids have been dying annually up to this point, and people also die in the second Quarterquell. Only this time, it's Plutarch who is the head Gamemaker. The jungle arena that is shaped like a clock must be his idea. It is his instructions that the people in the control room follow, such as how to manipulate the arena and put the tributes in extremely dangerous situations that lead to many deaths. In Catching Fire, it is clear that some of the former victors / new tributes are in on the plan and are willing to sacrifice themselves, but some are probably not. But once again, Plutarch seems to be treating their death as an unfortunate but necessary part of achieving peace. Once Katniss is pulled out of the arena and she becomes the Mockingjay, Plutarch moves full steam ahead with the strategizing and the propos. Snow ultimately does fall, and Plutarch makes sure to save Effie from being executed, and he stands up for Katniss regarding Katniss shooting President Almacoin. But there is one thing that precedes all of these kind things that Plutarch does, and that is the bombing at the Capitol in Mockingjay, which not only wipes out hundreds of capital kids, but also kills Prim, who rushes in to render first aid. So while Plutarch's cause is definitely noble, and I truly do not think that Plutarch ever intended for Prim to die, I think at his core, Plutarch is extremely pragmatic and very calculated. While he might feel completely terrible about what happened to Prim and genuinely mean it, I think at the same time he's able to rationalize Prim's death and simply attribute it to it once again being a necessary evil. Ultimately, the peace is achieved and no more kids need to die in the games. There's also the letter that Plutarch writes to Katniss once Coin is assassinated. You definitely get the sense that Plutarch truly wishes that Katniss eventually finds peace, and that maybe, just maybe, the peace that they sacrificed so much for is going to last. Now we're in a sweet period where everyone agrees that our recent horror should never be repeated. But collective thinking is usually short-lived. We're fickle, stupid beings with poor memories, and a great gift for self-destruction. Although who knows? Maybe this will be it. Katniss. That being said, once Katniss shoots Alma Coin, Plutarch might pull some strings, but he chooses not to stick around, which might be a sign that while he was working toward this massive, important common goal, self-preservation could at least partly be the reason why he tried so hard to succeed. So, is Plutarch a hero or a villain? It is clear that Plutarch was not happy with the state of the country and he wanted to change it. And he was willing to be a double agent and put himself at risk, which definitely is hero behavior. At the same time, while he only risked his life, he did contribute to many people losing theirs. And his desire to see the regime crumble always took precedent, which could definitely be seen as something that a villain would do. If I was pinned to a wall and had to choose villain or hero, I would most likely say hero, strictly for the fact that the games are now over. And despite his first unsuccessful attempt with Haymitch, he did keep the rebellion going. But if I could answer completely truthfully, I would probably place Plutarch Heavensbee somewhere in between. Not knowing exactly where to place Plutarch is, I think, a pretty good reason for Suzanne Collins to write a book from Plutarch's POV, because there's just simply so much we don't know. For example, why was Plutarch against the games even though he was from a wealthy family? And he should have technically celebrated the concept of the games with the rest of them. What was it exactly that made Plutarch snap and become a rebel? How did he go about recruiting his allies? Pragmatism and strategizing aside, how did Plutarch really feel about everything he did at the end of the day? I would love to open up the floor to you and see what you thought of Plutarch and the role that he played in the Hunger Games series. Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you in my next video.